1995, during her first winter break as a freshman, He Chenghui was preparing to go home. Her parents and sisters were eagerly awaiting her return, not knowing that they would have to wait a staggering 17 years. Welcome to Red Eastern True Crime. Let's dive into this story. In the village of Yueliangjing in Sichuan Province, China, there was a man named Ni Tianguo, who was known as the poorest bachelor. In 1995, when he was 38 years old and had lost both his parents, he had a reputation for laziness. Ni lived in an almost empty house and had trouble finding a wife in the village. Then, unexpectedly, one day, when he returned from an outing, he brought home a young, educated girl. He claimed that she was only 19 years old and might have some mental problems. Regardless, she wouldn't leave, and he intended to make her his wife. This girl's name was He Chenghui. She had two neat pigtails and fear in her eyes. He was locked up in a crumbling house, and in the following days, villagers occasionally heard her desperate cries for help from the rotting house. Strangely, no one ever asked about her situation. As the time passed, perhaps because of the abuse, she slowly stopped resisting, and Ni began to let her out and move around. The villagers soon noticed that whenever Ni left the house for a while, He would try to escape. Sometimes, she'd manage to get as far as the village entrance, but Ni would catch her, grab her by the hair, and beat her brutally. The villagers had grown used to Ni's behavior, and sometimes, when they saw her desperately running outside alone, they would help bring her back home. After several failed escape attempts, Ni took drastic action. He locked her in the pigsty with a big padlock and gave her limited food to prevent starvation. Living in close quarters with filthy animals and without much sunlight, He's skin had turned pale. Her only human interaction in her daily life was with her so-called husband, Ni. And as a result, her mental state had deteriorated, shifting between moments of clear thinking and confusion. During those 17 years, some villagers were puzzled, while others monitored her situation. Many male villagers envied Yi for having a young college girl as his wife. Initially, Ni felt a sense of pride, but his only regret was that He couldn't have children with him. It wasn't until March 2012 that a fellow villager returned from a visit and unexpectedly come across He, who had been followed a brief moment outside. Her condition was genuinely distressing, and out of compassion, the villager contacted Sichuan Provincial Broadcasting and Television Station. Shortly after that, reporters arrived in the village. When Ni learned about the reporters' visit, he quickly moved his sheep, rabbits, and chickens out of the house. The reporters immediately noticed the pale-faced He sitting on the doorstep. Perhaps to make a better impression, Ni grabbed a comb and began to loving comb He's hair. Ni asked awkwardly, "Do you love me? Do you want to marry me?" He replied firmly, no to both questions. Ni persisted, "What if I marry you?" He answered confidently, "No." Inside the house, the reporter discovered that it had been divided into separate sections for livestock, as originally intended. The brick house had many leaks and drafts, and the roof leaked when it rained. Basic necessaries were lacking. The bed was makeshift, consisting of old wooden planks with no pillows, just dirty sweaters for pillows, and military coats for blankets. Ni explained that the government had provided funds to build a house and start a pig farm, but he had mismanaged the money. As a result, he ended up with a rundown house and only a few rabbits. When the reporter asked about He's family and hometown, she hesitated to answer, her eyes shifting towards Ni nervously. Her fear kept her from speaking openly. However, once the reporter found a reason to send Ni away, He became more willing to talk. She clearly gave her home address and her father's name. After obtaining the information, the reporter embarked on a 10-hour drive to He's hometown. When they arrived, they discovered that the original address had changed considerably due to demolishing and redevelopment. Fortunately, a passerby knew He's father and mentioned that the He's family's oldest daughter had been missing for more than a decade. This kind person helped the reporter contact He's father. 2 hours later, He's father and little sister rushed to the hotel where the reporter was staying. When the reporter showed them photos of He, they were filled with immense joy. Tears streamed down their faces as they looked at the pictures. They had searched for He for 17 hard years and even thought that she might be dead. He's father also brought some family photos taken before He went to college. The vibrant, ponytailed, bespectacled young woman in those pictures was striking contrast to the pale and fragile woman they saw before them now. He, born in 1975, had 2 younger sisters. She had been a reserved individual with excellent academic achievements since childhood. In 1995, at a time when university admission was quite competitive, she managed to secure a spot in college. Her entire family felt proud of her. Her father borrowed 70,000 RMB to support her education and even personally accompanied her to her college. However, just after one semester, He mysteriously disappeared. It's said that one evening, as she was returning to school from her part-time job, she was attacked from behind, dragged into a van, and swiftly sold to Ni by human traffickers for just 100 RMB, which is about $15. After meeting with He's father, the reporter went back to Ni the following day. After reuniting with He, they informed her that her family had been located. Ni remained silent on the sidelines. But when he heard He's father's name, he decided to stop hiding. He confessed that he had known He's home address and her parents' name right from the start. Ni even revealed that when He first arrived, she had begged with him to take her home. When asked why he hadn't taken her home, Ni replied, quote, "What's mine is mine, so what?" unquote. A day later, He's father and little sister arrived, and there was a long-awaited reunion with He after her 17 years of absence. However, in front of her emotional father and sister, He appeared somewhat reserved. On the other hand, the 50-year-old Ni, who was accompanied by He's father, who is almost the same age as him, Ni repeatedly calling He's father dad, didn't seem embarrassed at all. When He's father entered the house and saw the terrible living condition his daughter had endured all these years, filthy, smelly, and without proper furniture, he could not hold back his tears. Meanwhile, Ni remained silent about his shameful role in human trafficking, always insisting that he had generously provided shelter for the lost He for 17 years. He implied that if she had ended up with someone else, she might not have survived. Soon after, with the help of her father and sister, He got into the car and left behind this nightmarish place. When Ni saw He being taken away, he chased after the car, repeatedly calling out, "Dad," refusing to leave and showing no remorse. Faced this tormentor who'd tormented his daughter for 17 years, He's father clenched his fist and resisted the urge to physically confront Ni. Instead, he gave Ni 1,000 RMB, about $160, and asked him to purchase a blanket. With the money in his hand, Ni stood there and watched the car drive away into the distance. Several hours later, He took a shower, changed into flesh clothes, and returned home to be reunited with her mother. Her sluggish expression worried her family deeply, but finally the family had their long-awaited reunion. He then received medical treatment at the hospital as arranged by her family. Ni did not disclose any information about the human traffickers to the reporters, and He's family decided not to take legal action against him. Throughout the filming process and after it was finished, there was no police involvement in the investigation or arrest of Ni. However, before the documentary ended, He's father revealed a long-held secret. When He was in high school, he had a bad temper and was under stress at work. In addition, his wife hadn't given birth to a son. He often physically abused his wife. Sometimes he also beat his daughter, who were particularly afraid of him. Feeling helpless to change their circumstances, He became emotionally depressed, and her mental health suffered before she went to college. After He's disappearance, her father carried a heavy burden of guilt and sought redemption. His attitude toward his family changed completely. The documentary highlights this point, so it was her father's fault that He had a nightmare life in that village. In this episode, some of the images are from the movie Blind Mountain, a 2008 film about human trafficking. The English version of the film has a more realistic and brutal ending. On the other hand, the domestic Chinese version has a more hopeful ending due to strict censorship. However, both versions of the movie are already banned in China. Why do you think He lived in that desperate village for 17 years before being rescued? Please leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments. That's our story for today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to my channel.